Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. So the Jewish expression for a day like today is, some people say, a good chodesh, which means a good new month. Today was what we call Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh literally means the head of the month. In the Jewish calendar, which is a lunar calendar, we go by the lunar cycles. The lunar cycle is approximately 29 and a half days. But being that we don't want to count half days for the month, so it's rounded off that the lunar calendar is structured around 12 months, with months alternating from 29 days or 30 days. So the total year of a lunar year is 11 days less than a solar year, 365, so 354 approximately. And therefore, if you want to know what day in the month it is, the Hebrew calendar, all you got to do is look up at the moon. Since the moon is in the news now, 40 years since the landing on the moon, you look up at the moon and you could see the cycles. So you have the new moon would be today. Basically, you won't see anything because it's a new moon. And as the moon begins to wax, so 7 days from now will be the first quarter, and then in the 15th of the month will be the full moon. The 22nd of the month will be the third quarter, and then again the cycle begins. Now there are many mystical meanings behind the new month and the new moon. It goes all the way back to Moses in the Bible, where God says to him, look up, this will be the new moon. This is how you'll begin to count your time, your calendar. But the focus this evening is on this particular month, which has its own unique personality, much different than any other month of the year. That today begins Rosh Chodesh Av, or Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av in Hebrew, the saddest period of the Jewish calendar. Begins what we call the 9 days. Starting with the first day of the month, and will conclude in 9 days from now, actually next Wednesday night, or next Thursday, Wednesday night, Thursday, with a day called Tisha B'Av, which means the 9th day of Av. That's the saddest day of the entire calendar, but it's also a period, the 9 days. The 9 days themselves, Jews, everything is more complicated than it seems. The 9 days themselves is an extension of what we call the period of the 3 weeks, which began 2 weeks, 3 weeks minus 9 days ago. 27 minus 9, so we'd say 18 days ago. With the 17th of Tammuz, a fast day. And what this period, on a technical level, symbolizes, commemorates the sad and tragic events that happened in history to the Jewish people, but also to the entire world. Beginning with the one that's most famous of all, of course, is the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. The first temple, destroyed by the Babylonians, on Tisha B'Av, burned down. And interestingly, the second temple, 490 years later, destroyed by the Romans, also on the same day. Did they know of each other? Did the Romans know that the Babylonians burned it down the same day? We'll never know. But clearly it happened the same day in the year. And more than that, what happened at the beginning of the 3 weeks was the breaching of the walls around Jerusalem. So first the Babylonians breached these walls on the 17th of Tammuz. Some have a different opinion, but that's one opinion. It took 3 weeks for them to get into the city, raze and burn down the city, and finally on Tisha B'Av, when they burned down the temple. And exactly the same thing happened 490 years later with the second temple, that the Romans breached the walls on the 17th of Tammuz, and then too it took 3 weeks for them to finally complete the destruction. And the Talmud, the Mishnah, goes on and says that 5 tragic events happened on this day. on the 9th of Av, and the same thing, 5 tragic events happened on the 17th of Tammuz. So these 2 days, and essentially are like the bookends that punctuate the 3-week period. But as the 3 weeks wear on, the 9 days was more intense because now both the Babylonians and the Romans got closer to the temple. So with each day, it progresses toward so-called more destruction. All the way till the peak of it, or to the worst of it, is when the temple actually burned on Tisha B'Av, which is a fast day. Actually, one of the 2 24-hour fast days, meaning we start the fast on evening, not in the morning, but in the evening. Unless Messiah comes, next week we will do that, Wednesday evening. And I should already make this announcement that we will actually have a Tisha B'Av service here. Because Tisha B'Av begins, I just looked at the calendar, at 8:16. And the class begins at 8:50. That's how it is. So what we'll do is, next week we'll have a class. We'll talk about relevant topics. But we'll also do the small service. It's not a long service. It's a short reading of the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations. And it's read in a particular way, so I've absolutely, I'd like to say I'm honored, I'm glad to invite you, because it's not exactly a happy day, but still, it's a day where, as I'll discuss now, that many great doors can be opened. So if you or any friends want to come, we will have here, that we'll do both the reading of Lamentations, the way it's done on Tisha B'Av, and discussion afterwards. Is that with Byron? Yeah, why not? There won't be refreshments, however. So, different type of refreshments. So we begin now the 9 days, and it has its particular laws. But what I want to explore here, those of you that get I don't know if all of you get the reminders. We send out Wednesday morning usually a reminder of the class and its topic. If you want to get those to remind you about this class and what we're discussing, so just tell Golda Malka at the door and they'll give that to you. So I titled this class, The Assault on Our Psyche, which I'll explain in a few moments why. Because the biggest question of all that has always plagued me when I was a kid, and I'm sure it would plague anyone that's a thinking person, was what is this obsession with destruction? It's one thing we celebrate Passover, the commemorating the Exodus from Egypt. Okay, that's it followed a very sad exile and bondage and genocide, but ultimately it was a good ending. The ending was the Jews left Egypt, the story of Exodus. We celebrate Shavuot, 50 days later, the receiving of the Torah. Sukkot, the protection of the Jews in the wilderness. Hanukkah, this miracle. Purim, another miracle. So yes, all these miracles were associated with negative events, and there was some form of redemption or salvation. But what is this celebration of a 3-week, 9-day, and Tisha B'Av period, which is all about sadness? It's not a happy ending. As they say, the light at the end of the tunnel sometimes is the oncoming train. So it's not always, in this case, Tisha B'Av is not a climax that ends in a happy story at all. On Tisha B'Av, the temple burned down. Until this day, we don't have a temple, and we know the troubles and the tragedies that resulted from it. If you know the history, the Romans didn't just destroy the temple, they exiled the Jews, they killed many of them. And from then on, we have been a dispersed nation, running from one country to the next. Whether we're being expelled or overtaxed or killed just outright, one way or other, it was always sad. And it all began with Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av also, other sad things happened in history. I don't know if you know this, but in 1492, we call it the expulsion from Spain, the Jewish expulsion. It was the golden age of the Jewish people in the Spanish Empire. And in Tisha B'Av 1492 was the date that the Spanish kingdom decided to expel all the Jews, and that began another sad period. I believe Tisha B'Av was also the day that World War I began.
Sunday and Nidcha, but Shabbos was Tisha B'Av.
Right. Okay. And if you look on our website, actually, I wrote a few years ago, I wrote the whole list of different events that happened. So all this is negative stuff. Why? You know, it's one thing that happened, but what is it about honoring it and commemorating that's so important. In Jewish law, for instance, God forbid no one should know of this, but when you sit Shiva, which means, well, no one, as I said, no one should sit, but when we lose a parent or a close relative, a loved one, so there's the law of sitting Shiva 7 days. What happens if somebody wants to grieve 8 days or 9 days? So it actually says you're not allowed to sit Shiva more than 7 days or less. And it's considered to be cruel, achzarius. It's considered to be insensitive to do so, because grieving as a catharsis, as a healing, has to be done with a certain measure. Not more than necessary, not less than necessary. Over-grieving can be unhealthy, can be overindulgent. Under-grieving can also be unhealthy. So there's a certain, human emotions need a time to cry, but if one becomes too much crying, that's another discussion. But think about it. Here we're sitting almost 2,000 years since the temple was destroyed, and we're still sitting Shiva for it, 2,000 years. Isn't that like some type of overindulgence in our own grief? And some people who grew up in homes with a lot of Jewish guilt and neurosis will tell you, yeah, there's been too much grief in my family, and time to celebrate. Some people say that Jews are good comedians and have a good sense of comedy because there's a very thin line between comedy and tragedy. And in a sense, comedy isn't just another form of tragedy, or as the comedians like to put it, it's funny, it's tragic when it happens to you, it's funny when it happens to someone else. I wouldn't quite put it that way, it's a little insensitive. But there is a thin line between the two, and sometimes you need the comic relief to get away from some of the sadness of life. It helps transcend, it helps free ourselves, it helps just the lightness of being. So what exactly is the significance of this period in time? And above all, as I always emphasize in this class, is the relevance. Even if you can find some explanation why it's important to remember the destruction of the temple and the other sad events that happened in this period, how is it relevant to us? Why should we be spending our time talking about it, studying it, honoring it, fulfilling these rituals, fasting on Tisha B'Av, saying these prayers? What does it mean to us? As I said, all the other holidays all have messages that don't take much to figure out what their message is. Basically, that no matter how difficult things are, there's redemption at the end. And each holiday has its own message in its own particular way, whether it's Passover or Purim or Hanukkah, etc. But here, as I said, what is the happy ending? And what is the significance? What's the importance of and relevance of remembering sad things? We have plenty of problems in our lives that we don't need to just add another set of problems of things that happened thousands of years ago. Many people have enough problems today and yesterday. What are you telling me about 2,000 years ago? So, to answer all these questions really, of course, requires digging a bit deeper into what really is the meaning of this period in time. And it's usually the case, if you want to answer any questions of this nature, you have to find the soul of the 9 days. What is the soul of the 9 days? And it's only once we understand that soul can we begin to see its importance. So overall, we'll say this. A healthy blueprint for life, if someone's going to provide you any direction in life, requires it being realistic on one end, on the other end, hopeful. So if someone presents you, for example, a utopian dream, that if you pay so much and so much money, we promise you happiness at the end of the seminar, usually it's quite unrealistic, because there's no pill you can take, and there's no book you can read, and there's no one or even a 1,000 things that you can do that suddenly make you happy. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, there are quick fixes, and there are instant gratifications, and there are different so-called supplements that people use to compensate. But as we all know, if you think about it a little bit, happiness, and generally a state of tranquility or inner peace, is a process. It's maybe a lifelong process. It's not about achieving a goal. It's about a mindset a heart set, developing tools to be able to deal with the challenges. When you look at people who have a certain peace like that, the secret to their lives is not that they never had challenges. You know, we like to say, oh, if I only had an easy life like that person, everything would be fine. Yeah, first of all, you don't know what's going on by that person. Nobody has an easy life. There's no such thing as an easy life. You can think someone born in wealth, that's an easy life. No, you have to also look at their parents, look at other factors in their lives. Everyone's got their set of challenges. Yes, it's true that some people, God forbid, for reasons that we may never understand, are struck in ways that are far disproportionate. But everyone has their peckle, as they say, their baggage. The secret of a happy person is that they, some way, know how to navigate through all their challenges. Not that they have less challenges. So it's like a good swimmer. What is a good swimmer? Someone who just chooses tranquil waters? Or someone, no matter what waters come their way, knows how to navigate. So when the waters are peaceful, they swim well. When the waters are stormy and choppy, they're wise enough to know not to fight the waves and not to fight the tide, and you ride with it. That's a good swimmer. A good swimmer knows when to stop, when to go. That's what good navigation is, when to fight, to choose your fights, not to put energy when you don't need it, or when it's going to be wasted, or where it can end up hurting you. So it's the wisdom of navigation. You know, in life, we all face certain battles. Do you fight every battle that comes your way? When do you give in? When don't you give in because you will appear weak or maybe destructive? They're not simple questions to answer. It's case by case, obviously. Also looking at the long term. So, on one end, the Jewish calendar, in that sense, is extremely powerfully reflective, like a mirror image of life. It doesn't say that the whole year is just some type of stable equilibrium and everything's going to go well. There are periods in the calendar that reflect moments of exuberance and ecstasy and great heights that we achieve. And there are periods in the calendar, like this period, which are low tide periods, where the low points in our lives. So, as a matter of fact, the Talmud and the Mishnah say it very specifically. Mishanichnas Adar, Kashem Shemishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, or the other way around. Just as when Av enters, we decrease in joy in this period. So when the month of Adar comes, which is the antithesis to this month, we increase in joy. What did I say? Increase? Decrease in joy and increase. So you see, there's like there's a counterbalance. Zelu umazeh, the expression goes. Everything has an alter ego. Everything has another side to it. So that's really what life is about. If someone were to come and ask you, a child, what is life really like? The answer should be more like a roller coaster than a type of plateau. It's up and down. Knowing that, by the way, from the earliest stage of your life, that shouldn't scare someone. It actually prepares you to know that you have to be ready for all kinds of twists and turns. And when you know that, your vehicle and your plan and your navigation, you align it to that, knowing that life has many different things. Look at people who, for example, were spoiled due to abundance or due to other things. They thought everything was going well, and then what happens when they suddenly get disappointed? It can be devastating because everything was going so well, and then suddenly, or the other way around. The point here is not to frighten anyone. The point is to prepare ourselves to know that life is much more complicated than just a smooth ride. And then when you know that, you adjust accordingly and you can align yourself. So that's the first reason why we actually recognize and commemorate this period of time, because we're not afraid of the fact that there are low times. There's nothing wrong with saying that. Obviously, as I said, it should be said with confidence, and you don't frighten a child or frighten someone and say, look, life is extremely difficult and be ready for the worst. That's not the point. The point is to know that it's more complicated. We break a glass under a chuppah. And everyone sees this who goes to a wedding ceremony. At the end of the wedding ceremony, a glass is taken and broken. And one of the reasons is to remember Tisha B'Av, basically, to remember the destruction of the temple. So you think, why at that moment, the height of a person's life, is the moment under the chuppah? Even those marriages that fall apart, they usually happen after the chuppah, at least. Even though I have been at some chuppahs, I must tell you, it was not that smooth. But you think that moment, at least, it's a high moment. And yet, at that high moment in life, you find that we break a glass. It doesn't seem like right timing. One of the explanations given for this, a beautiful explanation, but also a realistic one, is a psychological point, which is those that remember in the heights of their joy that the world is not perfect and there are people who are broken and there are hearts that are broken and have that sensitivity and empathy. So the moment the day comes when you're not exactly in the happiest moment, you'll also remember something happy. People who are completely consumed with joy, 100%, and there's not one room, no room for anything but their own joy, which is a type of selfishness, when they are struck, God forbid, they also no room for anything else. It's also complete. So it's like a mature understanding that even when things are completely perfect, never forget there are still some areas in this world that are not so perfect. And we just recognize it. It's not meant for people to in any way shatter or disturb the joy of the wedding. It's just meant like a statement of humility. In your highest moments, don't forget that there are people who are not married. There are people who are in difficult marriages. There are people who are struggling in one way or another. So the destruction of the temple is much more than just an event that happened thousands of years ago, as I am leading to. It's an event that reminds us of the broken part of life. And that even when you feel completely complete and wholesome, doesn't mean things are completely wholesome. At that moment you feel that way, there's still broken things in you and in others. And recognizing does not in any way minimize the joy or minimize the good times. It's just a type of humility that's necessary, especially when a person is very, very happy with something. So in the calendar, therefore, we have this balance and we have the cycle. We have the cycle of recognizing that there are the other moments, the joy, the heights of joy, and then there's the of moments, recognizing that there are moments in life when things are not, when they're a low point. And sometimes even destruction itself, death, loss, and so on. So what does that have to do with the destruction of the temple? Well, as I've discussed this many times, and that's not really the central theme here, but it's just I need to point it out to be able to continue our discussion here. The temple was not just a building that stood on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The temple is called the bridge between heaven and earth. Jacob, when he fell asleep in the Temple Mount, later he said, Zeh Sha'ar Shamayim, this is the gate to heaven. It's like a window that opens up between spirit and matter that helps fuse these two in our lives. The physical temple is only a symbol of this connection. When the temple was destroyed, much more than a building was destroyed. A window was closed in a way. A dichotomy was created, a dichotomy between spirit and matter, between heaven and earth, between our own souls and our own bodies. Until this day, we suffer from this dichotomy. Some of us more aware of it than others. As a matter of fact, when you think of in terms of healing and illness and so on, we could look at symptoms and we could look at roots. The symptoms of illness are many, but the root, as the mystics put it, all originate from one thing: a split, a schism between spirit and matter. So though that may sound abstract to some of us, if you really think about it, that's the root of all problems. It's not so simple, because once that root has manifested itself in many different ways, not so easy to retrace the steps. But essentially, it comes down to a split between who you are and what you do. Just to give an example, most people, you ask them, who are you? They'll give you their business card. But that's not who you are, that's what you do. If someone were to ask you who you are, actually, the honest person would say, well, I'm not really sure. It's so easy to answer who I am. You could say, I know what I'm good at, or I don't know what I'm good at. I know what others value me for, etc., etc. But who am I? The older we get, the more we recognize that there are many, many dimensions to a person. Are you a product of your environment and of your parents and of your childhood? Are you truly an independent person that has discovered your own path? These are complicated questions to answer. From a Torah perspective, who you are is your soul. You have a soul that has a destiny, that has a unique mission, an indispensable mission that's unique to you alone. And everything else in life are meant to be acquiring tools to fulfill that mission. Imagine if you lived a life like that, just for a moment, where God came personally and told you, this is your mission, and here I'm blessing you with these gifts and tools and opportunities to fulfill it. Everything else is the means. Everything else is secondary. It could be a scary thought if God came and told you that, but for a moment, what kind of life would that be? It would be a life of complete focus. You would not be distracted by things that are not part of your mission. And you'd be using all your energy toward the goal. Problem is, number one, most people don't even know they have a mission. Number two, even if they feel it, they don't know what it is. And above all, once we get caught into the rat race, we're busy chasing our tails. Most of us are busy making a living, trying to survive, pay our bills, succeed, be respected. Is it driven by a mission statement? Now, as I always point out here, if a business can't function without a mission statement, how can you and I? So from a Torah, I would even say mystical perspective, the root of all problems is this, that we do not know what our mission is, and therefore everything we do is not necessarily aligned to why we're here and who we really are. So there's what you do and there's who you are. Statistics show most people don't like their jobs, don't like what they do. In other words, most of the waking hours of your life, most people are not happy with what they do. However, there's some adjustments in this. What that means is we are resilient human beings. So we learn to figure out things. Some people learn to like something they didn't like. Some people just remain bitter about it, but you got to do it because I have no other choice. Other people numb themselves and in other ways try to escape the pain, or the existential pain of being involved in something they don't really want to be involved. There are the minority given that do enjoy what they do, and really do have found the ability to survive or sustain themselves through things that they truly enjoy, their talents, but it's not the majority. It's a rarity. And even that person has to contend with a lot of stuff. We have to deal with people all the time. People who need us, people who we need. It's a very complicated life. And then when you throw into the pot, of course, our childhoods and our attitudes and psychological wounds that we carry from different experiences in our lives, especially the younger, the more etched it is in our beings. So all these forces don't really make things very easy. So it's very easy to see how a person can wander away from their mission. More importantly, wander away. Never found it in the first place. And the standards of the world that we live in don't necessarily direct us toward that. You go to school, the best school will teach you how to use your tools to make money, to live a comfortable life, to take care of your needs, to find your mission. Which school ever promised that? To find your higher calling? So, from the perspective of the Torah, the root of it all is the destruction of the temple, because the temple was a bridge that connected spirit and matter, connected in more psychological, personal terms, who you are and what you do. And when that temple was destroyed, much more than a building was destroyed, a certain type of spiritual unity was breached. And we have what we call dissonance. Dissonance in our lives. Dissonance is the root of most problems. Things are not seamless, not consistent. What you see is not what you get. A person can tell you something, and they can tell you something, and it can be complete lies. Someone can smile to you, stab you in the back. Duplicity, deception. A false world, basically. Now, initially, that may sound very esoteric, but the consequences of that is everything. How can people murder each other, you think? Physical murder. Because you're so consumed with yourself, you don't understand that we're all part of one whole, and that becomes the driving force. Selfishness and greed. Now, we all have it. Some of us act on it more than others. But if you look at every human injustice, every type of crime, every inhumane act that any of us have ever done, it's all rooted in a complete distortion of reality. What do I mean by that? As the Talmud puts it, if you know and you felt that every human being on this earth was part of one organism, it would be inconceivable for you to hurt another person, just as it's inconceivable for your right hand to hit your left hand. It's an analogy from the Talmud. Why is it your right hand doesn't hit your left hand, even if it does something not so great? Because it's part of one thing. Hitting your left hand is like hitting yourself. So why is it that we're able to hurt each other? The answer is we don't feel it. We don't feel that we're part of a higher unity. So it's all based on a certain dissonance, a disconnection, a blindness, if you wish. The Talmud says, "Ein adam evra avera elim kein nichnas by ruach shtus," which means a person doesn't do a crime, a sin, unless a moment of insanity entered into them. So the obvious question, why? What does that have to do with insanity? People have temptations. You know, temptations is not insane. It's like that mother came running to the rabbi and said, my son went crazy. He's dancing with shiksus and eating chazan. Which means he's dancing with whatever you want to call shiksa, whatever. And he's consuming pork. So the rabbi said, that's not crazy. If he was dancing with pork, and that would be crazy, you know. It's temptation. So why does the Talmud call it insanity? The answer is because it's a blindness, a moment of blindness. If you knew that your act of putting your hand in fire would burn your hand, you'd never do it. No healthy person would do that. So how can we do something that hurts ourselves? Because we don't see it. We're blinded. It's insane for the moment. That's not a plea that will be accepted in the court of law. But it's an existential reality of a certain blindness. So with that being said, this is what the 9 days, so-called, commemorates. It's recognizing this dissonance. And in many ways, the profundity of this period in time is much deeper than even other periods, because it's very real. You know, it's one thing, Purim, dancing and singing. It's another thing on Hanukkah, Passover. Great. And it's true that, as I said earlier, it's light that came out of darkness. But it's still light. This period is a much more somber one, but in a very real one. It means, and this is in many ways the secret of Jewish survival. We're not afraid of looking the enemy in its eyes and saying, yes, we suffer from true dissonance. And even when we think we're happy, the dissonance is still there. Never delude yourself. This is not meant to sadden anybody, to create guilt, or to create some type of demoralize anything. It's meant to be honest. It's an honesty. So in many ways, these 9 days are really, above all, profound introspection and humble introspection, that whoever we are and wherever you are, the destruction of the temple has affected us. And its effect is it's our own personal destruction in a way. Our loss of innocence, our ability to be deceptive, our ability to do things that are inconsistent. You know, I'm being mild. Obviously, each of you can apply it a little stronger if you like. And some of the things, the ugliest things that we're capable of, rooted in what? In a dissonance, in a split between spirit and matter, between higher purpose and lower existence. And the challenge of our lives is to reconnect the two. That's the good news. So though Tisha B'Av concludes, at least in these days until the days of Mashiach, in a destruction, meaning in a fast day, where we honor the destruction of the temple, but its goal is not destruction. Its goal is to recognize how far things go when dissonance takes over. It ends up in destruction, one way or another. So, to analyze this a little deeper or further, the fact that it's 9 days is also significant. Why the number 9? Why not 8? Why not 7? Why not 10, 11? So, let's put it into more contemporary terms. You know, psychology uses the word psychology, psyche. Earlier Greeks or others used the word spirit. But we relate to the word psyche. People relate to it. Some of us are less frightened from psyche than from soul for some reason. But without getting into semantics of the actual meanings, let's just define it as your inner self. Okay? I asked the question before, who are you? What is your psyche like? What does it look like? Now, obviously, a very difficult question to answer. The most difficult part of it is, obviously, we're all subjective. How could I tell you? I don't really know what it looks like. It's like, you know what your voice sounds like? Listen to it on tape. It's usually not what you think it is. And even what your face looks like. You think you see it in the mirror, but others don't necessarily always see your face. You ever hear somebody comes and tells you, why are you looking so like sad today? And you don't necessarily feel sad. What are they seeing? And then you start studying yourself in the mirror, like what exactly is going on, and you try to change something. The point I'm making is that, Jeff, I think red has emerged. Your tongue doesn't work so well. He tested the battery with the tongue. That's what I'm referring to. Well, we could test it right here. Have you been able to hear me the last 5 minutes, even without the batteries? That's fine. Okay. Anyway, so the first step is, of course, subjectivity, blind spots, our inability to really see ourselves completely. But even if you go to an objective person, so of course their problem is they can't feel you from inside out as you feel yourself. So they may have objectivity, but how are they supposed to figure out what your psyche is? So basically, the ones that know, the one that's supposed to know you best. 1 second. Officially, you should be knowing yourself best, but you're subjective. Outside person has to do observation, they have objectivity, but they don't have that ability to see you from the inside out, only from the outside in. Yet at the same time, the fact is there is such a thing called know thyself, self-awareness, that we can develop with work. With meaning, if you know the qualification that we are all subjective, and you're honest and have integrity, you'll be able to find things out about yourself that you may not have on your own, through experience, through asking others, through allowing yourself to be challenged, and often through the trial and error of life, mistakes we make, sometimes hitting dead ends or rock bottom that wake us up. So there are many ways in life's experience that we discover ourselves. But you'd think, theoretically, from a scientific perspective, you could say that the easiest and simplest way to discover somebody's psyche would be to retrace the steps to the point before our psyches were so-called tainted, jaded, contaminated, whatever word you like. That means to retrace the steps to our early childhood. Because remember, whatever soul and psyche you have inside of you didn't just emerge one day. It was there from the moment you were born, and even prior to that. The problem is we have very selective memories about our childhood. My point here is to make is the following, that if you're able to analyze yourself as you were a child, if you're able to go back in time to the innocent, purest moments of your early years, before you were tread upon, before you were influenced by any external attitudes, even healthy ones. So it would be like the concept of, think of it like, I know we're middle of summer now, but that beautiful feeling when you wake up, first to wake up in the morning to a freshly fallen snow. And you go outside, and you see the snow that's untouched. In a way, you don't even want to make the first footstep, because you don't want to defile it. And of course, a little time later, the snow turns into a big mess, slush. But there's a certain purity to something in its so-called pristine state. So the way the Kabbalah and the mystics and Hasidic thought help a person heal and help a person grow is not just to look at your life as it is right now, but to juxtapose it over so-called your freshly fallen snow. What did you look like in the moments of the beginning of your being, when your psyche was pure, was more innocent, did not lose its so-called innocence yet? And this is, interestingly, from a mystical point of view, not a journey back in time. It's actually right here and right now, because, and this is a very fundamental concept that you may have heard of, but think about it. It needs to be reviewed again and again to appreciate. And the statement goes like this, that no matter what happened in your life, that pure point of your freshly fallen snow, meaning your pure soul, never, ever is compromised. What happens is the channels that connect your pure soul to your outer life, they may have been compromised. So think of it like a healthy heart that's beating and healthy, but the arteries, God forbid, get clogged. So the heart can be very healthy, but it's pumping blood through clogged or blocked arteries, and that's going to have a detrimental effect. So there's dimensions of the soul that will transcend any experience, any pain, and any loss. And frankly, this is the key to all healing. The belief, and more the belief, the method to access that dimension of the soul. It's like connecting to something that was not affected by everything that happened in between. And when you connect to that, you're able to create healing, true healing. So the good news is that no matter what happens to you in your life, that always remains intact. The challenging news is that that intact part can be so locked away in many closets with so many layers of heavy armor that you and no one can access it, which is really the defense mechanisms that we build up in life that become so intense and powerful that your own soul is so trapped. It's like the black hole of your own psyche that cannot allow any light out. It is so intensely protecting itself. And the earlier in life that we've been disappointed or hurt, the more that soul locks itself away. Today there's a word for it. Some call it the inner child. But this concept is thousands of years old, and the Torah talks about it very specifically and very directly. It's called your inner soul, which is your inner child, that never loses its innocence, it never loses its purity. Which is why, and I have no doubt anyone in this room, almost anyone you'll meet, even people who are living very dark lives, there are moments that we all have where we can start crying like a child. It may be a song you hear. It may be a moment of truth. It may be love. It may be something in nature. Suddenly something awakens in you. And you see people who are hardened by life, tough, even criminals, have that moment. What is exactly happening? What's happening is, for a moment, for a split second, that pure soul that was never affected by all their experiences showed its head. And you felt a glimpse of it. That's called a moment of truth, an epiphany. We all have it. It's not an accident, and it's not something that's just a fleeting illusion. It's very real, but it's coming from a place that is so far from us. That's why it's such an amazing experience. People who know how to connect to their souls know how to open that door in any way, at will, and also even know how to open it in other people. However, as they say in this school of thought, those that know don't say, and those that say don't know. People who know how to open another soul will rarely do it, because you have to know how to open it, not they have to know how to open it. They will never force your soul out of you. They can help give guidance and direction for you to free yourself, but this is not about an assault on your soul and trying to force it out. It has to be a process. Especially someone who's charging you a lot of money and tell you they'll do it for you. Rest assured that person is not necessarily a healthy journey, as tempting as it sounds. So we have this locked, trapped soul somewhere inside of us. And then you have the rest of your life. And so if someone asks you who you are, the true answer is you're that soul. But the real answer in the real time is you are a product of what you've done, what you're involved in. That soul sits there doesn't mean that you're living up to the standards. So the 9 days are essentially a period where this is the focus, laser beam focus on addressing this issue. So the assault on the psyche. Let's talk about that. The assault on the psyche. What it means essentially is this, that the destruction of the temple in simple, or in the psychological personal terms, is the destruction of your psyche, the psyche you were born with. Now, destruction is a strong word, so maybe assault is a little better, because nothing ultimately gets destroyed, as I said. Afal Pishachata Yisrael, who it says that even though he may done of crime, he remains intact, the soul. Every morning, in the morning prayer, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you've done in your life, we say a prayer that says, Neshama shenasata bi tahirahi. The soul that you've given me is pure. And you can ask the most radical, fundamentalist, ultra-Orthodox rabbi, who doesn't believe anyone is Jewish except him and his family, and ask him, I met a Jew, I met a person who's completely not Shomer Torah mitzvahs, as they say. He's not observant, at least to the naked eye. Doesn't keep Shabbos and Kohen, nothing. And has been that way for years and years. And this morning, he opened up a prayer book and wants to say a prayer. Does he say the prayer that the soul that you've given me is pure or not? I don't think you'll be able to find, at least an honest rabbi that can say, no, this person is not allowed to say that prayer because his soul is not pure. Only my soul is pure. It's just to make the point. Because we are not experts on souls, and we don't know what means a pure soul. A soul is pure not because you see it. There are people who can be living lives, they look on the outside, they may look one way, but inside their souls are very impure. Or at least their activities are impure. So this concept of neshama shenasata bi taharahi, that the soul that's inside me is pure, is critical to all healing. And it's really the essence of the 9 days, that even despite all the destruction, that always remains intact. But there's another side to it. Once you know that, now we address the other parts. So what happened to it? How do I reconnect it? And here we also have to be equally honest and sober and say, okay, what assault or what assaults, what have attacked my soul and psyche that have brought me from there to here? How far have I wandered from my innocent soul that I am? And this is not an easy journey, because this requires true honesty. So it's a combination. The reason I am specifically emphasizing these two aspects is because you'll find in different schools of thought, including in Judaism, there are those that focus constantly on how bad people are. There was called the Musar movement, which was involved and consumed with getting up and announcing how terrible everybody is, the sins you've done. And they were actually masters who knew how to get a whole community crying about every sin they did. Then there's another extreme, people who get up and let's make you feel good about yourself all the time. It's equally problematic. Maybe it's better than the first, but they never force you to look at yourself honestly. Like they say, there are no perfect shuls in the world. So there's some shuls where Rosh Hashanah looks like Simchas Torah, and some shuls where Simchas Torah looks like Rosh Hashanah. I'm not going to mention names, but you can find some in New York City as well. So the idea is to have a balance. A balance means to focus on the inferiority, on shiflus ha'adam is the expression, and how bad people can be, how low you can fall, may be sometimes truthful, but it's also not completely truthful. First of all, it doesn't give you hope. It just demoralizes you. And the Baal HaTanya made it very clear as an axiom that any force that demoralizes you, even if it seems like it's coming from a holy place, is coming from the Yetzer Hara, from the evil inclination, from evil. Why? Because if it demoralizes you, it breaks you. And if it breaks you, it doesn't motivate you to grow. There's a concept of shame. There's healthy shame, there's unhealthy shame. Unfortunately, many of us suffer from unhealthy shame. Unhealthy shame is demoralizing. It destroys your self-esteem, makes you feel like garbage, it makes you feel like nobody. Healthy shame motivates you. What's healthy shame? Healthy shame is an example. Unhealthy shame is obvious, many obvious. A child, for instance, that had an alcoholic parent has to be dealing with very unhealthy shame. He or she had to hide the fact from friends, shame of your own looking at someone that you're supposed to be a role model. These shames have very profound impact on the psyche, assault on the psyche, that demoralize you and do not necessarily bring you to any growth. You have to come to learn that it was not your fault, to distinguish that this was a parent who made a mistake. It's not you. You know, all these things. Why children blame themselves for their parents' sins. It's one of the weird things. Some theorists say it's because a child cannot accept that a parent is imperfect. So if something's going wrong, it must be me. However you want to explain it. Healthy shame is an example. For instance, you had a childhood friend. You both wandered away. Years later, you meet 30 years later. You did nothing with your life, and that person is very accomplished. You'd be embarrassed. Look what your friend did. That's healthy shame. Why? Because it's motivating. It's like saying, it's like sensing something greater, that your potential. So when we talk about negativity, without that aspect of discussing that the soul remains intact and that you have great potential, it's just very destructive. Many schools suffer from this approach, the fear-driven education, demoralizing. I'm sure all of us have had at least one teacher that did that. Was rebuked, was negative, made you feel like, some of us have parents that did that. On the other hand, to just have a la-la land type of approach to life and not ever have to be kicked in the pants and look at yourself honestly is also quite deceptive. So it's like one of the Rebbes, I think it was the Baal Tanya actually, that said that the key thing is to know how small you are and how great you can become. Because if you only have one of those two, if you know only how great you can become, so you have grandiose dreams, but you don't know whether you're there yet or you're not there. If you only know how small you are, you don't have a driving force to grow. So when you teach, let's say, a student of art or music, even a beginner student, you'll show that student or let that student listen to the great classics, the best music ever created. Why? That student may never reach there because you want to show the student what is possible. It's like but when you draw a circle, you need to have a perfect circle that you can juxtapose your imperfect one to see how far am I away from the destination. In other words, it's context. So it's a perspective that gives you that here's what's so-called an ideal model, and now you aspire toward it. So it gives you honesty. Where am I in regard to the destination, to the goal? And it does both things. It gives you how great you can become, but also gives you the humility of understanding how small you are. You're not there yet. Don't think you just because you spent one night reading that you suddenly achieved greatness. It's going to take a lot of perspiration and work and hard work and so on. The 9 days is such a period. So it has both ends to it. It has the potential is enormous, but at the same time it's a very sober look at what has affected and attacked our psyche. So each one of us has a place where we began that was, as I said, like freshly fallen snow. And then we wandered away. No different than Adam and Eve, who began in a pure Garden of Eden paradise, and then they lost their way. And they were expelled from that garden. That wasn't a punishment, it's cause and effect. Once you lose your innocence, you no longer can be in a place of such purity. So what point did you lose your seamlessness? Every newborn child, look at young children, a child is not capable of lying. A child will just say the way it is. So now I guess in our ostensibly it looks like, okay, because children are stupid. They'll get a little smarter, they'll know how to lie. You know? Like one person told me, my mother told me, you have to stop telling the truth. You have to start learning how to lie a little. That was like educational. So where do we learn how to lie? We learn from our parents. We learn from adults. Was this called growth, or is this called the descent of man? Which one is it? In other words, as we evolve and grow into adults, are we like more advanced, or we've regressed? So we live in a world where adults, it's an adult world, and we think children are adults in the making. The way the mystics see it is the other way around. We are children who've been contaminated, basically. And our search is to reconnect to the pure soul in a world that's not so pure. That doesn't mean we're trying to go back to the naivete or the ignorance or the vulnerability of childhood, but it means, imagine if you can combine the purity, the adventure, the sheer enchantment of existence that a child has, plus the wisdom and seasoning that we have as adults. That would be something. And there are people, I've met, not many, but individuals that had that combination. complete savviness, intelligence, not naive at all, but never ever lost, and never allowed their child to disappear to the point where it couldn't be accessed. So this assault on our psyche is a critical thing to look at. And as we mentioned in the email describing the class, there are really 9 ways that the psyche is assaulted. And this is why the number 9 is so significant. The Sefer Yetzirah says the following. This is the book of formation, some attribute it to Abraham, considered to be the first book ever written in Kabbalah, mysticism. Some say there's one book before it called Raziel HaMalach, but Sefer Yetzirah, there's actually a very good translation of it by Aryeh Kaplan. And it says the statement goes like this. It's cryptic, but with later sources and later commentary you can make sense of some of the phrases. So there's a phrase that goes like this. There are 10 spheres without substance, glima. Then it goes like this. 10 but not 11, and 10 but not 9. And thousands of pages have been written on that line, what that means. 10 but not 11, 10 but not 9. Obviously immediately brings up the 9 days. They're 9. 10 is the perfect cycle. And 9 is a missing ingredient. What is the missing ingredient? Interesting. I think I did write an article after 9/11, which is 9 and 11, but not 10. So 10 but not 9, 10 but not 11. So the way the mystics put it is the following. And I'll jump straight to the psychological application of it. There are 10 spheres, which are like the 10 building blocks of existence. They're also the 10 building blocks of your being, of your psyche. You want to understand your psyche, you need to understand these blocks, these building blocks. These are called spiritual DNA. So if you go to a doctor, a physical doctor, a medical doctor, take an X-ray, a CAT scan will give you an image of your physical infrastructure, inner infrastructure. And the mystics will give you an X-ray of your soul's structure, your psyche structure. And the psyche is made up of 10 components. Some of you may be familiar with them. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, Malchus. Said it pretty fast, right? 50 years ago, I couldn't have said it that fast. They divide into 2 categories. These are conscious, by the way, conscious building blocks. There's also unconscious. I'm not going to address that right now. The conscious building blocks are 3 intellectual, cognitive faculties. Chachma, Bina, Das. It's how the mind works, how we process ideas. It begins with a spark of an idea, develops into Bina, into comprehension, and concludes with Das, with knowing, I know, like the flash of aha, the aha moment. And then the 7 emotional faculties, which are briefly love, restraint, compassion, endurance, humility, bonding, and dignity. If you want it in writing, you can find it on our website. You can find it, if you have the Omer book that I did on the 49 days, it's spelled out there in specifics, the 7. So when the Yetzirah, Sefer Yetzirah says 10 but not 9, 10 but not 11, it's saying that the complete psyche in its healthiest form is those 10. If it's missing one, it's not complete, and if it has an extra one, it's not complete. The 9 days is a fractured psyche, missing the key ingredient that really connects all the 10. So which one is missing? Which of the 10 is missing? Any guesses from the audience? Yeah. Chesed. Okay. The one that's missing is Malchus, the last one, the 10th. You got it? Okay. Give her a teddy bear. She wins an award. Okay, please, Jeff. Okay. Now that Chesed is not a good suggestion, but you'll see why Malchus is the key thing here. So 9, not 10, or 10 and not 9 would be 10 with Malchus. Subtract Malchus, the 10th one, you have 9 left. And that's the 9 days. What is Malchus? Malchus is, in one word, dignity. You can have an intelligent person who has Chachma, Bina, Das, a person whose emotions are developed, chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach, chayid, yisod. But if they don't have inner self-esteem and inner dignity, there's a fundamental missing element. I meet smart people, but they're insecure. That's a missing malchus. Malchus is security, and insecurity is a lack of malchus. Now you think if a person is smart and they have good mind, why should they be insecure? If a person knows how to love and has been loved, why should they be insecure? Like, what's missing? What's missing is that malchus is the component that makes you feel that you are indispensable. Just because you're a smart person doesn't mean you're an indispensable person. You could be born with a good mind, grow up in a home that was abusive, and told you you're worthless all the time, gone through life and been hurt many, many times over and again. And yes, you may be intelligent. So your intelligence, you figure out creative ways to protect yourself. Sometimes the more intelligent you are, the more destructive you can become because you're so creative in your ways of protection. But self-esteem doesn't come through intelligence. Smartness doesn't make you secure. As a matter of fact, like some people say, he hides his ignorance with his arrogance. And the same thing is with all the other faculties, each of them lacking a profound sense of self-worth is going to be fundamentally compromised. Because all your skills become weak when you don't have the sense of self. Now, what is the sense of self? Sense of self, as I've discussed many times, is really understanding and recognizing, as a healthy child should know, that you absolutely matter. You're absolutely valuable. A healthy child born into a healthy home will get that message reinforced millions of times before that child grows into an adult. Born into an unhealthy home, whatever level of unhealth and dysfunctionality, overt abuse, passive abuse, absenteeism, whatever it is, keeps telling the child you're worthless. You're not valuable enough for me to give you attention. You're the cause of our problems, which is often the message that unhealthy people pass on to their children. And that child's soul goes into hiding. So the soul, tahirihi, remains pure, intact, and absolutely indispensable, but the child no longer has access to that part. So they live the rest of their lives compensating and trying to find something that will make them feel valuable, loved. It's the search for love, trying to compensate for a lack of love. Naturally, every person has it, every person deserves it. I remember one of the years ago, one of my earlier experiences, and this was after I was giving this class for a while, and to be honest, I was quite naive, and I probably still am, but I was more naive. I had not been exposed to real abuse in my life. And when I started hearing from people confiding in me or sharing with me some of their dark moments, at first I thought it was like, I didn't think they were lying. I couldn't believe it. It was like impossible. I remember, I don't even want to repeat some of the horrendous things that I have heard or seen. But I came to learn that there's a world that I was not aware of, a very dark world, a very ugly world. People can stoop to depths that are unimaginable. There are things you can't even imagine. If you're not capable of it, you can't imagine someone else doing it. And I don't want to repeat any of it here. It's not, you don't need me to repeat it. But you could imagine, I hope none of you have ever been exposed to it and remain naive. But if you have, you know what I'm talking about. And if not you, you may have a friend. And I realize it's much more prevalent than I could ever imagine. And of course, it's all under the surface. It's not obvious. People have developed all kinds of sophisticated mechanisms to conceal all of this. And that, of course, creates more problems. And as I began to see it in real time, in real life with people's lives, suddenly, in a very strange way, a lot of the teachings that I've learned through my life that were very theoretical came alive in ways I never would have imagined. Like I never appreciated the 9 days and this whole concept of malchus and dignity until I saw the loss of dignity in human beings' lives. Because it was malchus, yeah, it's a concept. I studied it in yeshiva. And then I read it many times. But when you see it play itself out in real life, now I know what the destruction of the temple is like. I wasn't there when it burned thousands of years ago, but I see it burning today. And you see it in souls and in bodies and people's lives in all kinds of ways. So I remember at the time being, I guess I was really reading a lot, and I was trying to learn because I wasn't just intrigued, I was almost obsessed with it. I remember when I read the book Courage to Heal. Not suggested reading for lighthearted, but it's an unbelievable book that was like, it blew me away. It's about real abuse and the weird twilight zone that people who've gone through abuse go through, a complete topsy-turvy world. And as I said, it's not a suggested book. Only for those that need a serious healing. And at the same time, I don't even remember how it came about. Someone gave me, I think, a videotape at the time. Or maybe I saw it on PBS. I'm not sure. I saw one of the early so-called practitioners of New Healing World was John Bradshaw. He was a former pastor and son of a alcoholic, went through the whole dysfunctionality. And he was involved a lot in the concepts of the inner child and healing and nurturing yourself and stuff like that. And I remember seeing this video, and like till this day it remains with me. And I don't think there's a more vivid way that I can describe to you the 9 days in personal terms, and the loss of malchus, and of course the restoration of dignity. And the video went like this, the scene, which first, I was just watching it in a very superficial way, but then it caught my attention. So James Bradshaw was standing in this room, he was leading a workshop. Mind you, this was all on the screen. I wasn't in the room itself, and still it had this impact on me. And he's leading a workshop of maybe, I guess, 40, 50 people in the room. And when I tuned in, he had just put on a tape that was reverberating in the room. It was the sound of a heartbeat. A loud heartbeat. Everyone was quiet, and this heart was beating. Pum, 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 pum. And it was like, that itself was quite haunting, hearing a heartbeat so loud. And that was like for a minute or two, only the heartbeat. And then he began to speak. He asked everyone to close their eyes. And asked them to visualize. He said, this heartbeat that you're hearing is the sound of your mother's heartbeat. That for 9 months, incessantly, without stop, 24/7, you heard. That was the main sound that you hear when you're in your mother's womb. I'm sure there are other sounds as well, but the dominant sound is a heartbeat. And when you listen to heartbeat for a while, it's very soothing, actually. It's almost like it sounds like being underwater a bit, certain rhythm. And then he began slowly, as I said, to speak. He said, this is your mother's heartbeat. And then imagine, after 9 months of hearing it constantly, you emerge in this world, and the first seconds of your life, you're clutched by your mother, and you still hear her heartbeat because she holds you to her chest. And she says the following words. I don't remember the exact words, I just remember what I remember. If you know what I mean. He said, your mother's speaking to you like this. I've waited for you for so long. I've always imagined what you would look like, and now I see you. And the most beautiful child I've ever seen. I've prepared a special room for you at home with a nice bed, with a warm blanket. I will always protect you. No matter what you ever will need, you could always come to me. And this is with a heartbeat in the background. And on and on. If there's anyone dangerous, anything that ever comes to scare you, remember you can come to me. The sheltering, the nurturing. And he goes on, probably speaking like this maybe for 2-3 minutes. Literally everybody in the room was crying, and including me, watching this on the screen. And it was not, you could always say it's a gimmick, it's this or that, but the fact is something deeply resonated. What was resonating? It resonated because you either heard these words, or probably more likely, you should have heard these words. And they resonate because you deserve to have heard these words. And I have no doubt that's what the tears were about. I know for myself it was, not that I remembered my mother saying that or not saying it, but it was such a moment of reality. Because this is what should have happened, exactly. You should have been surrounded by a heartbeat, and that's the words you should have heard. And when you hear it, you feel that's what you deserve to hear. That is the truth. Why was it not said to you if it wasn't? I don't even remember what happened afterwards. They opened their eyes, they discussed it. I don't remember the rest of it. That's the thing. And I saw before my eyes, when I saw that, to apply it to us, I saw this is it. If you had that message said to you, long before you had any control over it, long before we even remember, you won't even remember if it was said to you. You'll only know it from the lack of it later in your life if it wasn't said. Because health doesn't feel like anything. A healthy person is just healthy. What does it feel like to be breathing in a healthy way? If you can describe what it feels like, it's not a good sign. So health is supposed to be invisible, it's just smooth, it's what it is. So the child psyche, which is all of us, each of us, is born into a world like that. Thank God, no matter what kind of parent you have, the 9 months of your mother's womb you had for sure. And at that point, no matter how dysfunctional your mother is, she couldn't get to you too much. It's true that through substance abuse or other things, unfortunately, children and babies can be affected, but I'm talking about beyond that. So you had 9 months that God prepared your soul before it entered into this world. That doesn't disappear. You have it right now within your being. Just because you don't remember it or because you can't access it doesn't mean it's not there. It's what shaped you. So when we talk about tahira, the soul's being pure and it's having its true dignity, that is inside of you whether you like it or not, and no matter what anybody told you or not. What happened afterwards, of course, it's all downhill, usually. Which is, if it wasn't reinforced, then you begin to question, and then your malchus has been assaulted. And here's where the 9 days come in, because then every one of the 9 days is compromised, meaning every one of your 9 faculties. Your chachma will not be complete if your dignity is not intact. Your bina will not be complete. Your das will not be complete. We don't have the time here, but if you want to apply this more personally, and if you really look into it, you can discover, if not on your own, at least with the help of someone that's a little informed and objective, you can look at your life and you could find how your chesed, your love, has been compromised because your malchus was compromised. So essentially, the lack of that 10th ingredient ultimately will erode all the other 9. And the 9 days is a time when we look at that. We look at that erosion, we look at that assault. And the assault comes from many directions. I don't want to just blame it on our parents. I'm a parent myself, so I don't want to be blamed for everything also, Like those 3 80-year-old Jewish women who are comparing notes. And one of them says, my son, my 80th birthday, you should see what he did. He bought a ticket. Entire family came to see me here in Miami. Spent a week. The second one said, that's nothing. My son, he took us all on safari to South Africa for a month. And the third one looked at them both with compassion and said, you don't know what a son is until you meet my son. My son is a high-powered attorney in New York. And he spends hundreds of dollars a week going to therapy 3 times a week. And all he talks about is me. That's a son. So parents get a pretty bad rap. I remember when I did live radio show here in New York, and I think the title was, it was a live show with Collins, How to Honor Parents Who Don't Seem to Deserve Honor. So you can imagine it was a nice, interesting topic. The phones were off the hook. And literally, we couldn't even take all the calls. The transcript of it is on the website with the calls. And everyone, call after call, was they're bashing their parents. At some point, I felt really bad. I said to myself, is there anybody out there that likes their parents, loves their parents? Please call. We'll just tell the engineer, operator that you love your parents, and we'll take your call. Not one call came in like that. So the scientific theory I developed from that is either there's nobody in the world that loves their parents, or I attract people that don't love their parents. It's your choice. I don't know which one. Or people who love their parents don't listen to radio shows, maybe. Talk shows on Sundays. So then finally, I finally got one call that was different. You won't believe this. This was a parent complaining how she's being abused by her son. So, just another form of abuse. I guess that's what happens when you open up the Pandora's box. But I don't want to over-exaggerate. I do know parents that are beautiful parents. I know there are people even here that have great parents. Don't give them too much of a bad rap. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge what it is. And so the assault on the psyche in the 9 dimensions doesn't only happen those early formative years. It happens, and it's happening right now as well. And this is where we have less excuses, because now we are so-called adults. And where is it happening? I mentioned, I think, last week in my article, and I don't know why I had to go to Lima, Peru to discover this, but I discovered there that happiness is a state of being. That's the title, yeah. It was a conference on happiness, of all things. But I discovered this statistic that I heard from my newfound friend, David Fishman in Lima. Not Lima, Lima. And that was that the statistic that by the time, I think I wrote it wrong, not to age 10, but age 20, in the Western world, the average Westerner has seen 1 million advertisements by the time age 20. So, is anyone here 20 years old yet? So imagine you could add a little more when you get a drop older. And he also saw that statistic that in Denmark, for some reason, is the highest rate of happiness, of happy people. And his theory was, I don't know if it's his original one or he heard it somewhere, is that in Denmark there's also the lowest rate of public advertising. So guess basically the more you see, the more you want. The more you want, the less you feel you have. The less you feel you have, the more miserable you are. That's how it works. In high school, we had this poem that we loved, which was really an affirmation of the search for knowledge. It went like this, I think. It went, the more you know, the more you forget. The more you forget, the less you know. The less you know, the less you forget. The less you forget, the more you know. So why study? That was our brilliant thesis. Let's see if you can find a flaw in that argument. Yeah. So I guess... and I think, resonated with me this concept because I see it all the time. Oyev kesef la yizba kesef. The more you see, the more you covet. The more you feel you're inadequate. The more you see others have, the more you feel that you need, and you feel so inferior, etc., etc. But to get to the core of it, the assault, as I said, is absolutely through so much advertising. I'm not here fire and brimstone that we have to go back to primitive times, no more advertising. It's part of the reality of this world. Do we have to surrender to it? Also not. But don't underestimate its impact on you. I used to also think that advertisements don't affect me. Then I started wondering why they're spending billions of dollars if it doesn't affect me and it doesn't affect anyone else. Its effect is so profound, it's subliminal. It's been proven time and again of driving certain things into you that you can't dislodge that easily. So we live in a world where we are being inundated, even stronger, attacked all the time, at a psyche that is vulnerable and fragile in the first place. So if you grew up in a home where you had that mother with her heartbeat, reassuring you and giving you that absolute malchus dignity, even then, life is going to be plenty challenging. But imagine the earlier years we didn't even develop the malchus. And then we're exposed to a world with everyone wanting something else from us. Something healthy, unhealthy, demands, expectations, selling us this, selling us that. An overabundance of information overload. I mean, it's almost unfathomable to even imagine how many bullet holes are in our psyche based on all these attacks. So go figure out who you are. Well, that's why Tisha B'Av and the 9 days is such a valuable exercise. It's a time where we say, you know what, these 9 days, don't entertain yourself. We don't do weddings. We try to avoid anything that's unnecessary entertainment. It's not because we're just sad and we're sitting to cry about the temple. No, it's a time to be somber and look inside your soul and stop looking about all these things that stimulated you all the time. And maybe it's time to look at what your psyche is, where has it wandered, where did it begin, where did it end up. And not to make us feel bad, but actually to retrace the steps, to reconnect to that inner dignity that never was really, never left us in the first place. So in that way, you can say the 9 days in a strange way is maybe more powerful and more healing than almost any other holiday, precisely because it's not fraught with open celebration and open miracles, but really looking very seriously. It's like that brutal assessment, the brutal introspection necessary from time to time if you want to be healthy, if you want your company to be healthy. So every day, you don't need to be that brutal. But once a year, or the time comes of accounting, you need to look at it very honestly, very directly. And it's interesting that of this sad month leads right into the month of Elul, which is another month of introspection, but there already it's preparing for the new year. And as a matter of fact, the month of Elul and the month of Tishrei and the high holidays is born from the so-called sadness of this month of Av. Of this month is, the mazel of the month is Aryeh, the lion, Leo. Aryeh in Hebrew is 4 letters, Aleph, Resh, Yud, and a Hey. And the Shalah writes, it's an acronym for Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hoshana Rabbah. It's interesting. The mazel of the saddest year, the saddest month of the calendar, is the birth of the highest points of the holidays. Rosh Hashanah, Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hoshana Rabbah. Because this period is not about sadness per se, it's about honesty. And honesty includes looking at the Malchus and how it has been violated in our lives. And it's been violated in many, many ways, and it continues to be. So the good news is, you can stop the attack as soon as you recognize it. You can start protecting your own Malchus. Every time you're exposed by another marketer trying to sell you something, even if it is so-called convincing you that you must have it, it's another assault on your Malchus. I don't think you can sue, but you have to recognize that it's not necessarily good for your own inner self. Does that mean you have to shut it all off? Look, if you can do that, that wouldn't be bad, but it's going to be hard to go cold turkey. So it's important, however, to create balance. We have a Shabbos for that reason. One of the reasons we have Shabbos is to shut off external sounds in your life. And just to be able to look at your soul, let your soul speak a bit. Because remember, it's in direct proportion. The more the noise is outside, the less the hum of your soul can sing. The less noise outside of you, stimulating all your senses, your soul automatically begins to sing. It's how it works. Or let's put it this way, the hum that's singing all the time will begin to be sensed and heard, detected. So just as they say that there's a sound in the cosmos, there's also a sound that emits from every soul. The Malchus of your soul sings all the time. The fact that it may not be singing loudly or can be heard is because it went undercover. The 9 days is the cover-up. 9 different ways that we have been affected. It may have affected our chachma, the way we innovate. It may have affected our bina, the way we comprehend. It may have affected our chesed, our love. That's why I've said chesed before is actually very deeply impacted. The way you love and the way you don't love others is a direct impact of how you love yourself or don't love yourself. So Malchus affects all the 10 dimensions. As I said, that requires more discussion and detail, and it could be reviewed, but each of us will have our own particular one of the 9 that is probably the strongest impact of our own compromise may have. It may be in the mind, it may be in the heart, it may be in one dimension or another dimension. So we're here in these 9 days to look at that, and when we look at it, we learn to retrace the steps, and you could re-engineer and rewire the connections, because as I said, the connections have been severed, not the root. The soul is intact, pure. The inner child is intact. The song is there. What's been severed are the connections, your awareness of it, your ability to access it. And that's what the hard work is in this period of time. How do you reconnect? So one step, of course, is, as I said, sober introspection. The next step is actual work. It's looking, at a part of ourselves that we feel compromised. Try to find its connection to your own sense of self, inner dignity, sense of malchus. And you'll begin to be able to see where the weaknesses are. How do you fix it? Well, awareness is a halfway, but beyond that, you'll see that there are things you're always doing that are part of the bad habits that continue to reinforce the compromises and the undermining of your own self. That's the sad part of it. We are our own worst enemies. And we often do the things that are the worst thing for ourselves. Or we allow others to do it, but we're part of it. We're partners in it, enablers. Yeah, sabotage is a good word. It fits to the 9 days. Sabotage. And then it comes to, once you see it that way, then the question is, how do you build up that dignity? Well, you have to know that, above all, even if you don't fully understand it or fully feel it, so accept it on faith. You are absolutely indispensable. You wouldn't exist, and you wouldn't be here if you weren't. Obviously, the goal is for you to work it out, that you should understand it and appreciate it and feel it. But even if initially you don't feel it, you have to go with that faith, or else what hope do we have? What hope can we give somebody if there isn't the faith that ultimately you have inside of you, that pristine sense of being, that indispensable need to be? So if it begins with faith, so be it. Let it be faith, let it be belief, let it be trust. But that's what we go with, and that's what we work toward. And when you work toward that, you slowly can start building it up. Obviously, as I always say, it's critical to be around people that reinforce that as well. Around people whose their own dignity has been compromised. Misery loves company. So usually people who have low self-esteem usually love other people who have low self-esteem, because it doesn't make them feel so bad. I'm not that bad. Everyone else is that way too. You have to find and surround yourself with people that lift you up, that help you grow in that area, help challenge you even. You'll see that's not an easy thing to do, because when you're in a person that feels in some way a lack of inner self-esteem, you don't usually like to gravitate to people who are very self-confident. You start seeing them as arrogant, or start seeing them as too demanding, or as too pushy, or too, it makes you feel inadequate. So whether you know it or not, you usually unconsciously look for other people who are similar situation. That's something you have to stop. I'm not saying you have to overload yourself. You can keep a few miserable people in your life, but you should introduce a few that are not so. And you'll see, it starts, create a little balance. For every 10, one like that. I think I also heard there in Lima, Peru, he mentioned another interesting thing. He said, I also read it actually somewhere, that when a person loses $1,000, they feel much sadder in proportion to someone who wins $1,000, feeling happy. In other words, they don't cancel each other out. Losing 1,000 makes you feel much worse than when you gain 1,000, which is interesting. Why is that? Does that mean we don't have a sense of entitlement, or does that mean that losing is much worse for us than gaining? However you want to analyze it, but the result of that is, statistically, it means that for every negative thing in your life, you should have at least 3 positive things. So that way, that counterbalances that negative one. And as I said, people, friends are very vital in helping reinforce that, creating such an environment. Hopefully, one of the reasons we have the Meaningful Life Center and why we're here in this space is to do precisely that. I've always found in my life that when you create environments that from the top people feel comfortable, it spills down and everybody feels comfortable. You ever go to a wedding or a party where the hosts are very tense, or they hate each other, to put it bluntly? Even if they don't show it, the tension is in the room. No way. When you go to a place where the hosts or the people, the environment, those that are inviting you, are comfortable, it's chilled, laid back, it brings out a part of you that makes you feel much more comfortable with yourself. So tense people make you tense. That's the fact. Because we are fragile. That's a reality. And confident people make you calm. So it's vital to have environments like that. Now, we had a Purim party here. And one of the things that someone told me after the party was very interesting. It was a woman, one of these in her 20s, attractive woman who went to many Purim parties the night before. We had it Purim afternoon. And she told me, I asked her, I said, what do you think? And I wanted to hear her comment. She said, I'll tell you, this party is not as dramatic necessarily with all the fanfare, but it's the only place I feel at home. All the other parties, I felt I was in a show. I had to dress a certain way. Everyone was looking at each other. I really feel very comfortable at home here. And I found that to be extremely great compliment. Much more than sometimes you say, oh, wow, that was a great show. Because some of the most powerful things in life are the quieter events. To come and feel at home somewhere is a big compliment. Obviously, we all need entertainment, and there are times you want to go for the glitz and for the glitter and for the glamour, 3 Gs. And it has its place, I guess. But to come place to feel at home, to feel where your heartbeat is comfortable, is a great, great compliment. So I want to say to all of you, I wish you have your lives, that people who come to near you should feel at home, should feel comfortable, more than blown away or some other fireworks, just comfortable to be themselves. And you'll see a magic happens when people feel comfortable to be themselves. They don't have to perform or live up to someone's expectations or compete in the meat markets and so on. So the 9 days have its own particular, I guess, allure. Not quite the conventional one, but it has its power because it's honesty and looks at ourselves, at our psyches, the assault on our psyches, but with the goal of slowing down the attack, quieting it, and knowing that you have the armor, you have the protection to be able to allow yourself and allow your soul and your malchus, your dignity, to emerge. So I bless all of you, as I said, to feel at home in this world, at home in your own self, in your own body, and your own space. And hopefully together we can build a bigger home. And that is the idea of building a temple. A temple that was destroyed, essentially a home for God in this world, a home for the soul. A bird can fly very far, but what would a bird be like if it didn't have a nest that it can return to? So you need to have that nest to be able to fly far. I know many people who fly a lot of these days, but they don't necessarily have a nest to return to. So may you all be blessed with finding your hearth, the nest, and adding that 10th dimension that will turn the 9 days into a real holiday. As it says, that Tisha B'Av, when that 10th dimension will be added, will become the greatest holiday in the year. The greatest, more than all the others, because it had the power to transform that lonely darkness into something very powerful. So as I said earlier, we will have next week Tisha B'Av, the end of the 9-day period that begins now, a real Tisha B'Av experience, with the hope of actually trying to build the dignity in that dark moment. So we'll have a service here, which will begin probably around 8:15. We'll have maybe the evening service, followed by the Lamentations. We'll read it here with all the traditions. The lights will be dimmed, and some other surprises. There will be, as I said, no refreshments, so eat well. There's actually a meal you're supposed to eat an hour earlier than that. And then we'll have a discussion, which I hope to have. I'll speak, but maybe there'll be also more questions and answers and a type of open Tisha B'Av forum. And as I welcome you all. I don't know if the word welcome is right on Tisha, but whatever. Find the right word. And if anyone that you want to bring your friends or anyone that you think is appropriate, please, we'll do it right here. And meanwhile, we should have, what can I say, a blessed 9 days, good, healthy introspection. And remember, your psyches are strong, healthy, and pure. And with a little work, they can emerge. Okay. So this class, let me just say, has been dedicated by Mark Belinsky in honor of the yahrzeit of his grandfather, Menachem Mendel ben Meir, 4th of Av. And so you're honoring also the yahrzeit of Aaron HaKohen, many years ago, the high priest, and Arizal, which is all in this period. Aaron, the high priest, yahrzeit is today. Arizal will be on the 5th of Av. There's interesting reasons for that as well. And it's also dedicated to the speedy recovery of Simchiel Bas Hinda. If anybody has any special occasion or situation you want to sponsor or honor, please see Velvel, wave, or Golda Malkus at the door. And again, if you want, leave your emails if you have not left them, so we can keep you posted of what's going on. And let us celebrate our dignity together. Everyone have a very good week. Thank you.